Hello everyone, welcome to the Google Snippets channel. So this video is the third video on our Go and Ajax TODO app. So just learn how to use Ajax with Go by building a simple TODO app. So today we'll be looking at our backend, the way our backend is structured. So it's just simply the first thing we'll be looking at is our TODO structure. Our TODO structures has two fields, which is the description field and the status field. So the description field is just a string with a JSON tag description. So when I marshal it to JSON to be sent to the front end, the JSON format will be having a field of description. Instead of capital, it's going to be a lowercase d, and instead of a uppercase s, it's going to be a lowercase s. So that is how the to do structure will look like. Then we'll be creating a to do's map, which is just an in-memory database, because I don't want us to be having to go over initializing a database or something, just using an in-memory database for the sake of this app. So we'll create a func in it. So this is just our database. So this key, which is an integer, is going to be the ID of each to do in the front end. So from there, we'll just be initializing our database with two particular to do's. So this round.int 10 here is just calling a random number between 0 and 30. So round.int and 30 gives us a number between 0 and whatever the value we passed into it. So in this case 30, that will be the int. So this round.seed, make sure that every time we call round.int and we don't get the same value, because I don't want two to do's to have the same ID. So the ID has to be unique to each to do. So that's what round.seed does. So we won't have the same value two times. So func init is just simply, so you can read about Go func init. Func init is just a function that runs once before the main func in Go. So basically you can use func init to initialize databases. If you're working on a big web app and your API at the back end has to do with databases, so func init is actually a good place to initialize databases. Or if you are working with templates, a good place to just pass your templates and other stuff like that. So our func main now has two endpoints. The first endpoint is our forward slash, which is just the default route. So when we use that, we just simply serve our index.html file, which is what is here in our client folder. Then the second one is our forward slash to do. So forward slash to do is, we'll be calling forward slash to do on four different methods: method get, method post, method delete, and method put. So method get just gets all the to do's and passes them to and pushes them to the front end. Method post is for when we want to create a new to do. Method delete is when we want to refresh the whole page, like what we saw when I was explaining how the app works in the first video. So it's to just clear our database, so nothing's going to be there anymore. Method put is just to listen for changes if we are done with the task, or we want to undo the task, or we want to delete the task. So that is what method put works for. So, and they have a default case. If we are calling it on a method other than those four methods, we'll just put an error to the front end. That status method not allowed. So that is how our back end basically works. I'll be serving on port 8080. Yes, that's one more thing. So if you hit localhost 8080 forward slash, we'll be having this, then forward slash to do's or something will be coming into this place. That's how basically our back end works. So for our front end, so we're using Ajax to get information from our back end to our front end. So the first function we'll be looking at is our get all to do's. So get all to do's gets fired up immediately the page loads. So that's why I'm calling it here. So it gets fired up immediately the page gets loaded. So what does it do? So this thing here, this for basic, or everything here is basically how Ajax works. So you can visit Mozilla Developers Network to read the documentation on Ajax. What is how it works? So the first thing is you first create an XHR variable. So XHR is just XML HTTP request. It can be any other name, but I just decided to just use it the way they use it in MDN. And we'll call an open XHR open method. So open method takes in the particular method we want to call, which is a method get in this case. Then forward slash to do, that means we want to call a get method on our forward slash to do's endpoint. Then XHR send is the third one. So XHR send just helps us to send the particular request to the backend. So if you don't call XHR send, it won't be sent to the backend. So it has to be called every time. So if I have to be sending something, we'll be passing that in here. So when we look at our post method, or when we look at when we want to create a new to do with our method post, you see how we can send stuff with XHR send. But for now, I just get things. We're not sending anything to the backend. We just want to get from the backend. So whatever we get. So when we now get something, so to get it, we'll be getting it through this XHR response text. That's what we'll be getting it through. But first of all, when we called it open and we called XHR send, it will be eating our forward slash student our get. So what does our get does? Our get does encodes everything our to do, which is our database, and writes everything to the response writer. That's all it gets. So what we'll be getting here is just, so this XHR response text will just be the JSON format of everything in our to use database. So we are using JSON.parse to convert it to a regular JavaScript object, and we're assigning it to those items. To do items rather. So like I said, I defined to do items up here, which is an empty object. So our to do item here will just be, so I'm giving it a value right here. So it should just simply be, the object, or the JSON decoded value of our response text, which is our to do's. Because when this works, this form converts it to JSON and sends it to the front end. Then JSON.parse converts it back to the usual JavaScript object and assigns it to do items. Then we'll call our method render items. So our method render items, what it just simply does is just manipulates, just some do manipulation. Create our div tag, which is our div tag for our to do, which is basically what is here, and add a class list to do, then do a description h2. So that is this. Then the text contents will just be the to do items, then the description for that particular to do item. So I'm using a for in loop here, so you can carry it on how JavaScript for in loops work. But basically what it does is that when you range over an object with for in loop, the first value here, so I'm saying let's index into do item. So index is just basically the key in each particular entry in the object, or any particular data in the objects. Then whatever other value here, you can name it anything you like. This one can be of any name. Then whatever the other value here is just the particular, is just the particular so this, whatever is here is just the name of the particular object you want to range over. So what I'm doing is just for let index into item. So if I call to do item into bracket index, it's going to give me the particular value. So this is the key. Then if I do to do item square brackets index, like I'm doing here, just give me the particular data for that particular field in the object. So I'm calling to do items of description here. That means the description of that particular to do. So I'm assigning it to the text content of our description. Then I'm creating a done tag. Then I'm adding a class list done. Then an ID of the index. So like I said in our map, that the index, which is just the key in the map, which is the index here, will be the ID of the particular to do. So I'm setting the attribute ID to the index, and I'm also setting an href also. So whenever you click on it, it's going to bring us back to that particular to do. And I'm setting the text content to done. Then I'm giving it a right margin of 15 pixels just to give it a space. So there'll be a space between the turn and also the cancel, so they won't be jumbled up together, because they are both inline elements. And inline elements, they don't have the width of an inline element, is just basically the width of the text inside it. So just to give it a little bit of breathing space. So as I'm adding a margin right to it. Then I'm creating a cancel link, which is basically the same thing with a done link, but it doesn't just have a margin right, because there's no need to give it a right margin. There's no other elements beside it. And I'm checking if the status of that particular to do is done. So if the status is true, that means the to do is done. So I'm just adding a class strike. So our class strike here will just give us a line through the particular, because our line strike here just does text decoration line through. It's going to give us a particular line. Just strike over the text to say that okay, we are done with the to do. So that's what it does. Then it changes the text contents to undo instead of done, because by default it's going to be done. Then when we press done, it will give us a line through to, then the done will turn to undo. So when we click undo, the line through will go out, then it will turn to done back. So that is how our to do's work, just like we saw in the first video. Then after that, so I just appending the description to the to do div, appending the done link, and appending the cancel link, then appending the to do itself to the to do's div, which is the outer div that encompasses all the to do's. So that is how our get all to do's work. So whenever we hit our endpoint, this gets called immediately. So that's what renders our to do's to the browser. So that's all for that. Then the next one we'll be looking at now is a to do's visitor. So I'm listening on, let me open the image. So remember up here I got our to do's div, which is the outer div that encompasses all the to do's. So I'm just listening on a click event on any part of the to do's div at all. So if I click here, this is to do DB, everything here. So if I click here, it's going to, this will be fired up. If I click here, it will be fired up. So what I'm basically trying to, basically trying to listen for a click on the undo, the cancel, or the done. That's what I'm basically trying to do here. So when there's a click on any part at all, so it's going to first check for the ID and the text content. And the reason that's the ID and the text content in our to do is just the done and the cancel, because right here I said is that I'm setting an ID to them here. That's the only time I'm going to get an ID, which is not going to be an empty string. Every other part you click don't have an ID, it's going to be an empty string. So for this part, whenever you click the done or the undo or the cancel, so the ID will be like maybe 20, which is the random ID generated at the backend. Let's say 20 for example, and the text content will be done or undo or delete. So after that, we'll just be sending that to the backend. That's what we are doing here. So XHR send, but we are just separating them by, so we are concatenating the ID to the text content, but we are separating them by a space in between, so they won't be jumbled up. That's what we are doing here, and we are calling that on the method put forward slash to do's. So how we are doing. So if you go back to our backend and we check what is in our backend, so on our method put, what do we have on our method put? So what our method put just does is just reads the request body. So the reason I'm using IO to read all here is because what I'm passing here is just a simple string, not a JSON format. So we just use IO to read all request bodies. So it's going to return a byte slice and an error. So the byte slice, we can convert it to a string by calling string. So if we wrap it in string BS, so it's going to convert the byte slice. So that is type conversion in Go. So we're converting a byte. A byte slice can be converted into a string because strings are just slice of bytes or slice of runes. So what we are doing here basically, then after we convert it to a string, we'll just separate it. So I'm using string split to separate it on this space here, because remember in our front end I separated them with a space. So when I split them on this space, I'll be having a slice of just two values, which is going to be the ID one and the text contents two. So what I'm having here, so this part is going to be a slice of string with just only two elements, or two elements. So the first one is going to be the ID, and the second one is going to be the contents in the string. That's going to be done or undo or cancel depending. So after that, I'm converting the ID. So I'm getting the ID and the text. So ID is going to be the first one, the text is going to be the second one. So that is it. Then after that, I'm converting the ID to an integer with string conv a to I. So string conv a to I is just ASCII to int. So it converts a string to an integer. So at this point, if you click any other part of this image, the ID will be having to be an empty string. So it will be cut at this point. So at this point, if it's an empty string, it will be cut, because usually a to y cannot convert anything that is not a number in string format. Let's, for example, now string 10 can be converted by a to I into integer 10, but if you try to convert string abc, it is not possible, so it won't work. So at this point, if I click any other part of our to do, we are going to be having an empty string as the ID, which definitely won't work. So it will be cut at this point. So there will be an error at this point for that, unless I click my done, my undo, or my cancel. That one won't be having an error at this particular point. Then we'll return. So just log this message to standard output and we'll return. Then after that, if all is fine here, if there's no error, we'll just update our to do. We'll just call function update to do. I'll pass in the integer, the ID, the text, and our to do's map, which is our database. So what we're just basically doing with our updates to do is just to help us update our database. So what does update to do does? Just simply switch on the text. So if the case is done, change the status to true. So we'll just get the particular to do from the ID. Then we'll change the status to true. Then we'll reassign it back to the to do. Then if it is undo, do the same thing, change the status to false. Then if it is cancel, we'll just simply delete the particular to do from our to do's map. So delete is an inbuilt keyword in Go, also it helps us delete entries from maps. So it just takes in two values. The first one is the map, the name of the map that we want to delete from, and the second one is the particular index or the particular key we want to delete. So in this case, I'm just passing my to do, which is my map, and the ID, which is what I want to delete. So that is how update to do works. So what this is just simply saying is that, so at this part, if I call, so if I'm to click done on a particular to do, so it's going to be, so what we'll be having here is the ID, let's say 17 and done. So when it comes here, it's a done, so to change the status to true. If it's an undo, change the status to false, and if it's cancel, it's going to delete the to do from our database. Then after that, then already stage change here after everything is done. So we just simply call get all to do's back. So get all to do's does the rendering back. It does all the rendering and all, then comes on that to do and everything, and renders everything back to the front end. So that is how this particular case works. Then the next thing we'll be looking at is just, so I'm selecting my ad. So that ad, this particular ad, hashtag ad, which is the ID. So this ID is just the ID of the add button. Say want to add a new to do, which is this. I'm having a second. The second one, the ID is refresh. If you want to refresh the whole page, like cancel all the to dos that we have. So I'm just getting this add button here. Simple. That's what I'm just getting. So once there's a click on that add button, that's what I'm doing here. So once there's a click on it, just call this function. So what this function does is just get this description from the input from this form here. Let me use this. Let me use the image to explain. So it's going to be, so this hashtag add is just the ID of this particular add button. So when it is clicked, it's going to get description from hashtag new task. Hashtag new task is the ID of this input field here. So we're getting the value from it. So if the, and we're assigning it to description. So if the description length is less than 3, that means if you're having a task with just three, less than 3 characters, we don't want to have that. We want at least more than 3. Or the description is add new to do. Add new to do is the placeholder for the, so if you look at it, add new to do is the placeholder for the particular input tag. So we don't want that also to be the to do. So we just alert, enter a task to do, and we'll return at this point. Funny enough, Go and JavaScript work the same with their return. The way their return statement works is almost the same thing. So we just return at this point. So we don't want to go on with this function. Else, if there is no problem with that, we'll just do our usual Ajax stuff via XHR, then XHR open, then XHR send. Then we'll check if there is a ready state change and all. So the first thing we'll first do is that we'll create our XHR, then we'll open it on a post. So this time we're opening on the post and slash to do's. So now we are calling method post now slash to. So what are we saying? We are just sending the, so what we are sending is just simply a JSON encoded form of, or a JSON encoded object with just one field description, which we are setting to description. So this field there has to tally with our JSON struct tag field description. Then the value we are sending to it is this description which we got from this, the value in the input field. So we're just sending it to the backend. So everything is just JSON stringify. So the way it works is JSON stringify in JavaScript turns an object to JSON format, while JSON pass turns a data in JSON format to an object. Then in Go, it is just simply JSON new encoder and JSON new decoder. So JSON new encoder changes whatever it is dot encode changes to JSON format. And new decoder dot decode just converts back from JSON format to our Go struct. This is what we are just sending to the backend. So in the backend, to get that, we'll just simply this on our method post. We just create a new to do variable just as a placeholder to hold our new to do. Then we'll just JSON.new to get our out.body. So when this one sends, it sends it to the, so it sends it to the request body. So what we're just doing here is we're just reading the request body. So we're decoding from the request body and we're decoding into our new to do variable that we defined here. Then after we do that, then we get that we're just simply setting a new to do into our database and we're assigning it to do. So I was doing to do, which is our database rand.intent. We are giving it a random integer, which is going to be the unique ID for that particular to do. We are setting it to the to do. So that is how this particular part works. Then after all said and after it has been sent, we just want to do document the query selector new task dot value equals to this. So I just want to make sure that after that is being sent, because the way Ajax works, the upside of Ajax is that the reason why Ajax is really good is it doesn't have to refresh the whole page. So since the page is not refreshed, whenever I put a task here and I do add it, after everything is done, the task will still remain the same. But I don't want it to remain the same. I want the inputs to be empty. So I'm just assigning the value back. So I'm just manipulating the DOM to make sure it is empty after we add new items. That's what I'm just doing here. So after the already stage change and everything, we just simply call get all to those back. So it will be, everything will be rendered to the web browser. So that is how it is. So then the last thing we want to listen on is just our refresh button, which is this button here when we want to clear all our to-dos from the browser. So what that does is just simply on click, we just call this function that we'll do our Ajax stuff again. So on this time, this time I open on the method delete and forward slash to do. So method delete, what it just simply does is just, so method delete just simply clears out our database, right? So it's just assign our to do database to an empty map, so there's nothing in there anymore. That is all it does. Then we're not sending anything for sure. So this is just to help us hit the server that okay, a request is coming in, a delete request on a part forward slash to do's. Then after that is done, so we'll just do our already stage change. After that, we'll just simply call get all to do's. So it will render everything to the screen. So this time it's going to be nothing because we've already cleared out our database. So that is basically how Ajax works. So the upside of Ajax is, which is really important, is it helps you to do things without having to reload all the page. So it is very similar to WebSocket, but in this case, it is not really WebSocket per se. So it helps us to do things without you having to reload the whole page. Like if you notice that when we were in the first video, when I was showing how the to-do app works. Every time I click on do or cancel or done, or everything just appears without this refresh button really showing, or it won't refresh or anything. It's just going to be the way it is. So that's what happens. I think if say we are on a social media network like say Facebook and you want to like something, so when you click the like button, instead of the whole page having to refresh every time and having to trouble the server by giving your own information every time, you just simply go to that particular piece of code and make changes to it without refreshing the whole page. So you are still going to be on the same page. So the like button will just, so when you click the like button, it just become blue or whatever color it changes to show that you've liked the particular post, or where you want to comment. So that's how Ajax works. So I guess those things are implemented with Ajax if I'm not wrong. So that is basically what Ajax does. And the downside to Ajax, I don't really know. I guess maybe because Ajax is JavaScript, it can be manipulated because everything will be rendered to the browser. So someone can just come and inspect the page and make some changes to it, and it's going to affect your server. So that's why it's always advisable not to do security critical things with Ajax. So this to do app now has nothing to do with security. So if anybody is to modify the Ajax here,